I actually went to a business conference. And in that business conference, I realized that there was other people that were wanting to get rich and wanting to better themselves. And I was at that time a senior in high school now. And eventually, what had happened was, in this business conference, someone was passing out a flyer, and it said, "Free food." That's all I remember in this conference. And at that time, I'm like, oh, whatever, and I just put it in my pocket. And what ended up happening was, I went to the conference. We got really hungry, and at the end of the conference, my friend and I was like, "Hey, we should go eat." And I, opened my wallet, and it was only $5. And when I saw that there was $5, I was like, well, I need to use this for gas. I can't use this for food. So what ended up happening was, my friend was like, "Hey, remember that flyer? There's free food." My friend and I ate, and we were literally about to walk to the back door and dine and ditch type of thing. And the guy who gave us the flyer was like, "Hey, why are you leaving? You stayed for the food, might as well stay for the message." And then I was like, oh man, I respect this guy. I don't want to lie to him, but like, hey, I don't want to leave you. So we ended up sitting, and at that time I was searching who God was. And I just remember someone was standing at the front, and at the very first slide, it said, "Does God exist?" And that's when I realized that God was speaking to me, because at that time I didn't really pray or didn't really believe if he existed. And that kind of was what started this Adventist journey, was because of that invitation of free food. After the message, my friend, he was actually with me at that time. He was crying because he too was going through some struggles, and he was touched by the message. And I found out that there was a group of people that were doing a revival church program for the weekend. They were asking us to come back for the next morning for Sabbath school. And I remember asking, what time is Sabbath school? And they were like, 9, 10 a.m. And I'm like, I've never been to church this early before. I was like, okay. So my friend and I, we ended up getting home really late. And we ended up waking up really early the next morning. And around, we got there probably around 9:30 or so, or 10. And I remember me and my friend were so tired, we just wanted to sleep at the back. And so we found the very furthest pew from the furthest pew in the back, and we sat down. And right when I was about to sit down and go to sleep for the next service, the same guy that gave me the flyer was like, "Hey, why are you sitting in the back? I saved the seat for you in the front." And I'm like, where is this guy coming from? Because I'm like, man, he's just eyeing me or something. So it was really weird. And so I remember sitting at the front. It was divine service. And he said, I remember in my mind, I was like, man, I can't sleep anymore, because I've had this really bad image where people who sit in the front, if you sleep, the preacher calls you out. So I'm forced to listen. And because I was forced to listen to the divine service, he started talking about his life, and it felt so relatable to what I was going through at that time. And I remember exactly what it was. It was December 2, 2006. This guy made an appeal about giving your heart to God and asking for Bible studies. And at that time, I was a senior, and I was like, man, I can't do this yet, because I haven't went to Vegas, I haven't gambled, I haven't done all these different things. And the Holy Spirit I was wrestling with the Holy Spirit, and I just remember a tear just dropped down my cheek, and I was like, oh, that's it, Lord, you got me. And I remember just standing up, and I was just standing up in front of all these people, and I didn't know who they were, but all I knew was that God was reaching out to me. And ever since then, it's changed dramatically, because from there I ended up getting baptized 6 months later, and we would go to instead of Friday nights, we would be playing poker or going to the movies. We would end up going to Bible studies in Loma Linda. So imagine here from Glendale to Loma Linda on a Friday night with all that traffic. We would do that for 6 months, and I ended up bringing some of my friends and my classmates, because we were so thirsty for the Word. And it was like the first time that that God was real, and, God brought certain people in my life to answer some Bible questions. And that's when I've met like all these other people that were also in the same like boat as I was, and they were, searching and trying to find, meaning and purpose. And I'm just so grateful that happened, because, my life has definitely changed for the better.
So I'm going through my little brother's Halloween bag on Halloween and checking his candy, just trying to make sure everything's good and stuff. And I see that there's a glow tract in it. And like I said, I was already doing, a bunch of Bible studies. I was already really studying for myself. And so I saw on the back that it says, if you want to continue to study the Bible, go to this website. And so I went ahead and did that. I didn't think they would send a person to my door. That was the first time someone actually ever came to my door. And I get a text. I'm in class, and I get a text from my mom, and she's like, "Oh, hey, there's this guy here who wants to study the Bible with you." And I'm thinking, he's a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness. I put my information somewhere, and they showed up. That's what happened. And I actually told her, tell them no. Tell them I don't want to see them. No, tell them to go home. And she doesn't do that. She tells him, actually, just go ahead and wait. She tells me, no, he's different. And then she tells him, go ahead and come back after she's home from school. And so I get home, and then he comes later in the evening, right before dinner. And this guy, man, this guy is a saint. I said no to him probably 40 different times. In any way from oh, no, it's okay, to no, I can't do this. And he was just so persistent. And finally I said yes, just to kind of get him out of the house. And he came back, and yeah, we studied the Bible together for a good few months. We studied for a really long time. And then one day, my mom and her boyfriend had gotten into a fight in the morning, and I woke up and I heard them fighting. I got the kids all into one room, and I put the TV really loud so they couldn't hear. And at some point, my mom's boyfriend took the keys to her car or something. And we didn't really have a car growing up. I grew up taking the bus and walking to school and walking to get groceries, or taking my bike to get groceries. We didn't really grow up with a car. So the fact that my mom had a car and that he was taking it away really messed her up. And she started walking down the street with her keys, and she followed. And I think that was kind of her breaking point. She was already on drugs. She was already back in the game, and this man was literally breaking her every single day. And at some point, she sat down and she grabbed rocks, and she would throwing them on her head, and she was just trying to kill herself in the middle of the street. We called the ambulance to come and get her, and they took her, and she had told them, oh, hey, he did that to me, because he had a history of abuse. They knew that, so they took her to Loma Linda Hospital, and she was, they told us to come and pick her up, so they didn't keep her on a psych, because they told the doctors and stuff that it was all him. And as we're driving back, we get in, him and her started getting into a fight again, and they started fighting over the steering wheel while we were on the freeway. And we ended up T-boning the car that was in front of us. And that was kind of the last time I really saw my mom for a few months at least. But being in the car and experiencing that was crazy. And we were put into foster care. We were permanently placed with my grandma eventually. And I just remember, the Bible workers that were at the church that I was at, the guy who was teaching me and giving me Bible studies, they were just the most supportive people in the world. Really, they were. I don't think I would have made it through that time period without those people in my life at that specific moment. They started telling me about this amazing, so the way that this program was described to me is this amazing summer job in San Diego for 10 weeks with a bunch of other young people. That's how this specific program was explained to me. And this is why I really have trust issues now. So I was all for it. And really, I kind of did want this escape from my life. I wanted to get away from it for a little bit. You know, all I had known was home. You know, we didn't have money. We weren't traveling growing up. I left the state a whole twice before I turned 18. We went to the beach maybe once a year, and we live like an hour away from the beach. You know, we didn't grow up traveling and doing all that stuff. We just didn't have the money to. And so when I heard about it, I wanted to go. I ended up doing my first youth rush program summer of 2013. Summer of 2013. Was baptized at the end of that summer. I think everyone who's really young and gets converted kind of goes through it, where they're super just rigid and legalistic, and I think that has definitely evolved over time to focus more on just how much Jesus loves people, and that's what I want to be a part of. You know, I'm a part of homeless ministries. You know, I'm a part of. I help run a women's Revelations Bible study. I'm still super active in the church wherever I can be, because I really do think that it's just showing God's love to people. That's the most important thing.
Yes, in 1970, my husband was drafted, and this was during the Vietnam War. Almost everyone who was drafted was sent to Vietnam. And I was expecting our first child. I had lost one child, and we petitioned the Army for a deferment, but they rejected it, so he had to go. His father took him to the bus station, I'll never forget, and he just was beside himself. He just was inconsolable because he had been in World War II and he knew what could face his son. He was a conscientious objector and was sent to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and was trained there to be a medic. And of course they were on the front lines. We knew that. There was one program, however, called the Project White Coats, and only Seventh-day Adventist young men were chosen for that because of their health backgrounds. So he did apply, and he was chosen for that. Guess why? He was chosen for that because he had taken care of animals and worked on the farm at Indiana Academy. And that allowed him to be chosen to be a white coat. The white coats had to do one experiment, and they would be given some kind of a disease or condition, and a new experimental medication would be given to them. The rest of the time, they took care of monkeys and worked in the lab and that kind of thing. So our first child was born in Frederick, Maryland, where Fort Detrick is. It was a closed fort. So I, once in a while, got to ride in with my husband and see what it looked like, but you really couldn't see much. I know that germ warfare was taking place there. In 1971, the war in Vietnam was de-escalated, and my husband was given an early out from the Army and did not ever have to do an experiment. So we went back to Anderson, Indiana, and he worked in construction, and I raised our children, and we moved several times, and I finally then went to school and became an LPN, and as I said, I tested out and was able to get my RN very quickly. So I started my career then in nursing. Because of my husband's job, at one point we moved to Portland, Tennessee. And there was an Adventist hospital, Highland Hospital, there at the time. But at that point, I had become very disillusioned with the Seventh-day Adventist Church and had left the church. So I had asked that my name be taken off of the books, and was not living as a Seventh-day Adventist, although my husband was. But I did work in the Seventh-day Adventist hospital. I had many friends who were and were not Seventh-day Adventists. All of them were wonderful Christian people and shaped my life in huge and valuable ways. But at all this time, I was not a Seventh-day Adventist. So I explored many areas. I decided to drink a little. I didn't like getting sick though, so I didn't do that a lot. Ate whatever I wanted, did whatever I wanted, learned a lot. I started to feel the need for spirituality. The church, I felt, had failed me. I felt that I had been deceived. I felt hurt. I felt ostracized. I really think that a lot of that was because of the extreme legalism that our church was going through at that time. When I was a little girl, my parents lived in a small town, and there was a small church, but there were a lot of young people there. And we would always get together, and the kids would play, and the parents would talk, and the women would gather in one area and gossip and whatever, and the men would go outside, and if anyone got a new car, it was a high day. They had the hoods up, they were looking at the motors and so on. But I wasn't allowed to ride my bicycle. And at a very young age, I thought to myself, why can they look at motors and talk about cars, but I can't ride my bicycle? Things like that made a big impact on me, and I just felt like the church was wrong. And they were wrong. I saw ladies with beautiful brooches and fancy watches, but if I wanted to wear any type of jewelry, no, that was terrible. Just things like that started it. As I got older, I felt like the real message of salvation was being lost to, do you drink coffee? Do you eat meat? Do you think it's okay to wear a wedding ring? And on and on and on. I saw a woman who was a beautiful organist told that she could no longer play the organ for our church because she wore a wedding ring. Things like that. I actually had to leave the church to find it. And you know, I can't tell you what year it was. Isn't that funny? But I can't. I was at camp meeting because we were raising our grandson, Lucas. And Lucas was a junior age for camp meeting. He was a junior. And he loved camp meeting. So I was staying at camp meeting with him, even though I was not a Seventh-day Adventist at the time. And so what do you do if you're at camp meeting and your sister-in-law's there with you? You go to the meetings. It was a wonderful pastor. There were two different pastors there. Trying to think of their names. You will know them. One was Ron Halverson, who has since passed away. And the other one, I'll think of it in a minute. You'll recognize his name. Pastor Halverson made a statement that changed my life. And I'm sure others have heard him say this, but he said, Seventh-day Adventists don't want to just catch the fish, they want to clean them. And I thought, that's what I was going through. And then the rest of the sermons were just about salvation. And I knew then that my spiritual longing really was to go back to my family, my church. So on Friday evening, there was an altar call. I grabbed my sister-in-law's hand and we ran to the front of the gymnasium where the meeting was being held at Indiana Academy. I was rebaptized my husband was rebaptized with me, even though he had not actually left the church. He felt as if he wanted to he wanted to be re-baptized. So we were together in the Anderson, Indiana church. Much rejoicing, much crying. Really way more made out of it than I had wanted. I just wanted it to be quiet. But I'm very happy that I did. And like I said, I'm not the same Christian that, if I even was a Christian then. I had been forced by my parents, more or less, to go to Seventh-day Adventist schools and to church and to the academy. I don't mean they hit me or brutally beat me or anything, but there was no choice. So when was I converted? When? I was converted at camp meeting that Friday evening when I drugged my sister-in-law and we ran down the aisle. That was conversion, because I knew then why I was doing it.
When I think about my experience in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, so much of it is distinctly theological. And I think that that's great. I think it comes from our missional heart, right? Like, we want to spread the message, we want to spread the gospel. Maybe some of it comes from like a defensive spirit because of what happens on the internet, right? Like, no, we're not a cult, we're not crazy, I promise you, we're normal. But so much of it has been intensely theological. And while that has a whole host of really great positives, I think it also comes at an expense. That oftentimes we treat people as like belief-having containers, where if you believe in the Sabbath, then you're one of us. But if you're not, then we gotta kind of be careful. And so I think that this series, being an intentionally non-theological approach to the Seventh-day Adventist experience, is so healthy for our churches. To shift us away from the theology having containers to human beings who have lives, who have stories that influence theology, yes, but influence everything else. To help us realize that there's another way to interact on Sabbath morning, another way to do community than just prayer meetings and Bible studies and outreach, to realize that there's a deeper way and maybe even a more fulfilling way to connect with the people that we've been in worship with and in community with for, say, decades.